Buongiorno. We are here today with Mike.
Thanks for having me over here. Appreciate it.
What's your last name, Mike?
Huarte. So my last name, it's Spanish Basque. Do you know what Basque is? Basque is an ethnic group in Spain and France, in the Bay of Biscay. So my grandfather's from there, his relatives. And so they have their own little language, and they hated Franco and Spain. And
So you're very familiar with that part of the world where it's basically the whole...
I'm familiar, meaning that my family's from there.
Right.
And I've traveled there, twice. I've traveled there twice. Once when I was really young, and then once recently.
So basically, Mike, I have you here for a very interesting topic.
Of course.
And we touched on it a little bit because I know you're into it, and I know you have a whole collection, and you're doing this whole thing with medieval times. Is that what it is?
So, yeah, I got into... The short end thing is I do like a type of reenactment. So I have suits of armor, I have medieval clothing or things from ancient Rome and ancient Greece and stuff like that. And it's just been a topic.
Why do you like it?
It goes back to being a young boy, right? You know, when I was a little kid, I was just so into those tales, you know, from reading the Iliad and, you know, the Odyssey, and then reading stories of mythology, you know, like Odin and Thor and Zeus, and, you know, all the Greek stories of like Perseus and Jason and the Argonauts and Hercules. It just grabbed me. You know, like you always see little boys, they make a sword out of a stick they find on the ground at the park. I was that kid.
I mean, it's still huge. We're Marvel and DC.
Oh, yeah.
Look
I mean,
and
you could say like those stories, those Marvel and DC stories are echoes of the ancient stories of all the heroes.
Right.
I mean, going all the way back to like, you can even say like the Bible and before, well, I mean, the Iliad is as old as the Bible or more so. I can't remember, right? But, you know, like the story of David and Goliath. I mean, that's sort of a hero story, a hero myth, you know, or the story of, it's the David and Goliath and, you know, the story of Saul, King Saul, and how he fell from grace, right? I mean, there's echoes of that, and sort of like say echoes and say something like Oedipus and how he fell from grace, right?
But for you particularly, you specifically picked the medieval world, like that.
Yeah,
Europe,
like so.
Europe, right?
I was into it as a young, you know, high school age, and I got into college, and so there's a club. It's called the Society for Creative Anachronism, and it's the oldest reenactment club in America. Started in the late 60s, you know, over at Berkeley. And so it's just people who are into the Middle Ages. And so they make clothing and they do the arts and crafts. And then back then they're like, we want to make armor and fight. How do you do that?
Does it allow you to get, you know, to kind of mentally be in that world when you're like putting on
you
the
have these
clothes
moments, I would say, so especially, so we'll get together. So I'm going to give you an example. We'll have a camping event, and there'll be like 4,000 or 5,000 people. Some of the big ones have like over 10,000 people. And so then we'll have like a battle, and people, you know, no one dies obviously, but you know, like we use wooden weapons, but you're hitting people pretty hard. I mean, it's not, you know, you need the armor, but you get into these battles with like maybe 500 aside. And for moments, these brief moments, it's like sublime. You forget where you are. You can, but it's like a second or two. And then you hear someone, you know
Feels
whatever.
good, doesn't
but
it?
it's just, you can like, it's like you touch it or you see it and then it's gone. Right.
Yeah.
And it's those moments, right? It's almost like, I can't describe it. It's like if you ever had a good day of skiing, right? Where you're just you on the mountain by yourself, or if you ever surfed before, everyone's got something like that. And for those brief moments, because it's physically taxing, I mean, you're wearing more or less a real suit of armor.
How heavy is it?
40, 50 pounds with everything.
Oh, wow.
With everything. That's a
40,
shield
50
and a wooden
pounds.
sword, and helmets are like 10 to 15 pounds. Body armor is about 20 to 30. Then you have armor, which is like 3 or 4, leg armor, something around, covers your neck, you know, depending upon if you want like something you see in a movie where it's full plate mail from head to toe, all steel, that weighs more. Or if you have something like a Roman suit of armor, but there's not as much, or a Greek suit of armor, it doesn't cover every piece of your body.
So what do you have at home?
I have a bunch of different stuff. I have like a Greek suit of armor, like what's called a linothorax, which is sort of you see in the Alexander movie. It's like mostly leather, and then steel helmet, and then I have like chainmail, like classic chainmail from say like Battle of Hastings and stuff. And
What, I'm curious.
Yeah.
I know there's a market for it. I know
it's
people spend mad money on this.
Yeah.
So, do you have would you say like, are you a collector as well?
Oh no, I'm not a collector. There's people who collect. So there are armorers,
What does it go
craftsmen. Those things are going to have a good suit that you could use to fight in, $10,000. All right.
Okay.
I mean, so that's like an expensive.
But if you want to just collect,
But if you want to collect it where it's done, so then you see stuff in a museum where there's like little etched flowers and animals etched into the armor, you can get people to make that for you. But that's $40, $50, up to $100,000.
I see.
But those are true collectors. Like you'll have a craftsman will make it, right? And then the person it'll look beautiful and it's functional. I mean, at least the people that the armors, the people that I look at, if I'm going to spend a lot of money on something, I want something that's going to fit me and that I could actually use, even though I'm never probably going to use it, because if I get dents in it, it kind of defeats the purpose if it gets all banged up. And
so you're buying it to use it.
I'm buying it to use it. So the stuff that I buy is
so it's not an investment for you. You're just literally.
No, this is not going to. And realistically, it's never going to be an investment. And
why? But if you buy these old,
if you buy something that's historically accurate,
yeah,
it could be. But the market's small. I mean,
is it?
There's collectors out there, and it definitely exists. Sotheby's has got a whole arms, weapons, and armor like catalog they put out yearly for stuff that goes on the market that's actually historical pieces, and there's a market for it, absolutely. But as a true collector where you're like, I want this piece from the 1400s, no, I don't do that. I like to put it on and hit and try and hit somebody, and I'm not using a real sword, I'm using a wooden sword.
You have real swords?
I have real swords, yeah. A functional, I would call them high quality modern reproductions that I could use to fight with if I needed to.
How good are these swords? Are they like Japanese style quality?
Well, with modern metallurgy, you can make steel now that is better than anything. So you can buy a lot of people would use leaf springs from the bottoms of cars, and the quality of that steel is almost better than anything that they made in the Middle Ages.
Really?
Because of the temperatures and the chemical composition of the steel.
Wow.
With modern technologies, right? They can fine tune the leaf springs.
Yeah.
So you can take those swords and guys will take a car apart, grind down, just shape the sword, and then the sword can bend almost in a U, and spring back to true straight, right? And to get that in the ancient, like in the Middle Ages or the ancient world, was very difficult because they didn't understand what the actual chemistry was going into the metal.
Got it.
Right. So the Japanese got very, very good at it and making these great weapons. And they had this long process. And also because Japan had very little iron on the islands. So you saved it for weapons and, expensive things. So they got very, very good at it. And not until the modern era, until the beginning of the, middle of the 19th century, did they know chemically what was going on in the metal. But they had all these steps that they would do, it takes 3 months or 4 months to make a beautiful Japanese katana. And there's all these steps, and you treat it with this sand, and you put it in water, and you do this and you do that.
Right.
And what they're doing, through trial and error, they've learned you do all these extra steps. You make this sword that can bend, and it's sharp, and it's soft where it needs to be soft, and it's hard where it needs to be hard, and it's great. But once you get into modern technologies, you can make steel that is really strong, can flex, will come back to its straight shape. So
this group that you are part of,
the SCA, that's the
it's
acronym. It's a medieval organization. It's throughout the entire country, Canada, Europe.
I know a guy in Canada who does the same thing.
Okay, so it's probably the same one. There's other medieval reenactment organizations, and think of the people who want to dress up in this.
Mostly men, right?
Well, no. I mean, it's the men who fight. It's about 5% of the population of people who compete with armor, and fight is women, about 5%. So women do it. But there's just not a lot, and it's kind of rough on your body. It's tough. And because it's a club, there's no weight classes, right? There's no you would be, if you wanted to do it, we're about the same height. You're competing against guys who are 6'6", 6'7".
Wow.
That's rough.
What's the rules?
Well, the rules are like, so we have like wooden swords. I mean, they're not oak. It's a type of, we use rattan, which is a type of
For some
bamboo.
reason, my brain went to UFC right away. Like,
Yeah. Imagine like there's no weight classes in the UFC. Like that would be like the original UFC back in the early 90s. When you have like, there's a guy who's like 5'8" and he's fighting a guy who's like 6'6". You're like, oh, this is going to go, it could go horribly wrong. It usually goes horribly wrong. Being tall really helps, just especially with weapons.
Right.
It really, really helps. But so you have a wooden weapon and a suit of armor. And if I hit my opponent hard enough in the head or the body, I win that round, right? That's it. But it's up to the combatants to say, it's up to my opponent to say, you got me hard, you hit me hard enough, I'm going to take that as a defeat.
Oh,
and we're trying to replicate what was sort of like tournament combat. So instead of just jousting, which you've probably seen in the movies, guys on horses, they had tournaments where they would use wooden weapons to some degree, or sometimes steel that was not sharp.
Right.
And they would fight. And then they would, there's different ways of doing it. Sometimes they would just beat each other till one guy gave up. Right. And sometimes, they would, they would, and I'll get into this. And other times they would have someone would count, like if you hit someone so many times, then. And so that's what you see a lot in the modern versions of reenactment armored combat. Our style is me and my opponent determine when one of us loses, right? There's no judge. The judge is there.
And there's no horses, right?
Oh, no. Well, the people do equestrian stuff, but jousting is a whole different. You need a trained horse, armor. You got to practice a lot. Jousting and then falling off a horse.
Ooh, with armor?
Backwards.
Oh, my God.
I just want you to remember... If you've ever ridden and ever fallen off a horse, now imagine falling off backwards. The armor actually helps a bit in kind of cushioning the damage you take, but still, that's money, and the horse has got to be trained. You can't just take your average trail horse,
right?
Put a suit of armor on you and jump on the horse. Horse is going to not be comfortable with that. You got to train him. So there's only a few people who do that, and they have money, and that's, I would say that's pretty. I've never jousted. I've used a lance to like ride a horse and put the lance inside of a ring or a target. And I know people who do some jousting, but
gotcha.
You need money.
So what are the rules for fighting?
So the rules for fighting is if I had a weapon and you had...
But who chooses who fights who?
Well, you say there's a tournament on a Saturday afternoon at a park. Okay. You'd have like 40 combatants and you just it's like a double elimination, like a traditional karate tournament. You get, double elimination is if you and me compete and you hit me, right? All right, you win one, I got one loss. And if I fight somebody else and I lose again, I'm out. And you make a little pyramid all the way up to the top, right? So as we're fighting and you hit me in the head or I hit you in the head, and if it's a strong enough blow and you learn that by practicing, right? Then I'd be like, if you hit me, I'd be like, you won, right? You struck me in the head because we're supposed to simulate this tournament style of combat. It was a hard enough blow that if it was a real weapon, it might have incapacitated me. It's not going to chop my head off because you have a helmet.
Yeah.
Swords, armor works, right? You can get hit a lot. And so that's our system is it's sort of, for lack of a better phrase, it's kind of like an honor system, right? And we have judges on the sides who'll be like, hey, Mike, you're kind of cheating. Ellie keeps hitting you in the head and you don't say anything. Maybe the first one wasn't hard, or maybe the second one would be like, what's going on, right? So we do that system. There's not a judge just be like, you win, you lose. We don't do that. And that's because it was started way back in the 60s. And as the club grew, it grew into this method. And the reason I think they did it is just it's easier to manage because these were all, it was so new, right?
What's the cost?
The cost on a yearly
membership?
Oh, membership's like, I don't know, $100 a year.
$100 a year, and then you have expenses of like what?
Oh, you pay more in gas practically driving to a park and 3 hours away from here because it's all through Southern California.
What about taking care of the armor and all?
Well, the armor. I would say my raw cost a year is about say $5,000. It's about $600 a month, but that includes buying new equipment, and that's sort of on the high end. That includes like buying gas. Say we go to Arizona for a big camping event. I'm going to drive out to Arizona. I'm going to buy food. I camp. Like a large camping event's like $100, $150 to camp for like 4 or 5 days. but sometimes you just drive to a park up in, I don't know, say like Los Angeles, and, you pay for gas and get takes like $10 to go to a tournament. It's not that expensive because everyone does it as a hobbyist. Right?
Yeah.
These are people who they are interested in it. So there's a lot of people who do, besides the fighting, they do arts and crafts, but they'll take raw wool they get from somewhere, and they'll make their own thread and then weave their own clothing together. People from beginning to end. Or they'll do calligraphy, like the old medieval scrolls, right? How they did that, how to do it perfectly. And if they want to color the scroll, they'll buy pigment that someone makes, the red pigment, and they put it into the scroll. So it's not modern paint. It's historically accurate. And some people really get into that stuff. They get into the itty bitty, the very fine tuned detail. Right. I'm going to make my own ink. And that's all they do. They just make ink to give to the people who write on scrolls. But it's historically accurate ink made from this plant and that plant. Or they do food and clothing and, jewelry, everything you could, woodworking.
Would you say it's more like psychologically speaking?
Yeah.
It's more like a getaway? Like
it's absolutely. It's a
mental
type,
retreat.
It's a type of escape, and it becomes like an identity, right? Yeah. So I'll make an analogy.
I can see that.
Yeah, it's that a lot of these people, this is what they do every Saturday. I mean, this is people use the expression in the club. This is like their church. Every Saturday.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Rain or shine, for some people will go to an event, and they'll drive 3 hours one way to go hang out at a park or a hall. Say if it's an art event, they put it in a hall where you can display art, and they'll just and they'll have a feast where people cook medieval food and everyone sits around and eats.
How does that affect your mindset when it comes to coming back to the real world? When you're coming to this modern world,
well, there's escapism that's part of it.
Of course,
there's this large element of escapism, and the people who started the club, and this kind of carries a trend. So you'll hear the people say they're like geeks or nerds. They'll use that terminology. It kind of goes hand in hand because when you get that hyper focused on one thing, and this becomes your everything. It becomes your social group. It becomes like an ideological group. Even though the club is, you have people across sort of an ideological spectrum, right? There's conservative people and there's very liberal people within the club. But there's this commonality of we like the Middle Ages. And then it's social. That's why the SCA as a historically reenactment club is so powerful because it has this large social dynamic. It's not just about sword fighting and armor.
I get it. That's what I'm actually interested in most.
Yeah, and it's not just about
social aspect.
Because you have the club, because it started from nothing. They just made it up in the 60s, and it just grew and grew. I mean, there's 50, 60,000 active members in the world who pay membership dues, and some people say there's probably double that participants, right? Throughout, but they're not all in one spot, right? They're not all in one spot. But it becomes like going back to this. There's like the psychological dimension. It's because it becomes a social club. And
how does your wife take it?
Oh, she.
And the reason I ask is,
oh yeah,
you know how women are towards men who play video games.
Oh, they always have side eye. They're always like, unless you make money, right? If I'm like, if he's like, hey, I'm a Counter-Strike champion, but I make $250,000 a year winning Counter-Strike tournaments, she might be like, all right. She's not going to be like, it's not like, well, I have my own construction business,
right.
But it's
show me the money.
It's a status thing, right? Because it's interesting because even in the club, status is huge. Because what the club created, they created titles. Because every region of the country has a kingdom, a fake kingdom, right? And so then people can fight in a tournament to become the king. That's how they started the club when they got it going. How do we have a king? Well, we'll have a tournament. Whoever wins a tournament becomes the king. That's not historically accurate, right? Normally, whoever became the king, who had the biggest army and killed everybody else, and it's like, I'm the king, right? That's an oversimplification. But so that's how the club works out. So they created a title. So if you won the tournament, you would become the king of which is called the Kingdom of Caid, which is all of Southern California, right? And then after that, you would
Kingdom of what?
Caid. Caid is Southern California within the Society for Creative Anachronisms. But you go up to Northern California, it's the Kingdom of the West, and so on and so forth. They're all throughout the country, Canada, Europe, some other places. So the club, this going back to the...
Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Your wife never got into it?
She came, as always. All right. She came a couple times. She dressed up. She wore some pretty, princess dresses. Because she would go, we camp. We go, like, the big thing is we go camping. We go to like a park. We rent out the entire park. We put tents up, medieval tents. We have tournaments and we have arts and crafts and we have big feasts and we drink. There's a lot of drinking. And it's a big party, right? And she did it. But she likes to camp and wear regular clothes.
What's the traditional drink? Ale?
Ale, cider, mead. Yeah. And then people bring, like,
tequila.
People have entire bars. Like, some people have, like, they'll have an entire wet bar with, like, would you like a Mai Tai? Would you like, this? Would you like that? You can have,
Right.
But some people make their own beer and mead and cider. They do that too.
So it's a party. They have musicians.
It's a party. And there's music and there's dancing. There's, like, classic medieval dancing, and then there's, like, they have but they have, like, there's a lot of belly dancing at night. It all kind of
belly dancing.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Some better than others. Some bellies bigger than others.
Okay.
Yeah, I could tell jokes, but anyway, so the club, it's because of the social dynamic. That's why people get into it. Everyone, because I can talk to people about Finnish clothing from the 12th century, right? And someone will see something like, oh, that's really neat. Tell me about it, and I can have those kind of very obscure conversations with somebody, and we both enjoy it. And now there's this huge social club, and you have all these different avenues of things you can pursue if you have interest in this. And then the club, because it's been around for so long, it creates hierarchies. And then because there's hierarchies, that's how humans separate themselves. It creates a kind of that political game of who's in charge of what and when they're doing what. And humans love that. It's no different than, I remember explaining it to my grandmother years ago, right? Because she was like, what are you doing? She saw all the stuff in the garage and she's like, what do you want for Christmas? I'm like, I really want, like, this medieval hat, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, I would give her, like, a pattern to make. And she was like, why? And then I explained it to her and she's like, oh, this is like going to church. Because she grew up in Arkansas.
What is your attractiveness to this era? To that lifestyle?
I think part of it is it's that sense, there's a sense of adventure. There's a sense of separating yourself from the modern age. And then I'm mimicking this, but there's a more, a realness to the human experience, whereas we're detached from in the modern. I'm from the outside looking in, right? I'm looking into because humans experienced it, right? And part of it is just being a young boy and, like, thinking swords and armor and knights and all that stuff was just interesting and cool. I like that stuff more. Like, did I like guns, playing war, cowboys and Indians when I was a kid? Yeah, but I like swords and armor more. And then as I got older, like, I started college, I started defense, and then I found this medieval club and I did a bunch of different martial arts stuff, but I always stuck with the medieval club. And it's a martial art, more art than martial. I mean, it depends how you want to adjudicate it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people, could you fight in a real sword combat? I'm like, I suppose, but because we have rules, I probably wouldn't do so well because my rule, I fight in a set of rules. I don't fight to actually kill somebody.
Right.
You see, like, the different, like, there's a difference.
But isn't there a hunger for that a little bit?
Yeah, there's different styles too. There's, like, there's a style of, like, heavy armored combat where they use steel weapons that are blunt. They're not sharp, but it's you fight until someone goes down, or they do a point system.
I'm trying to understand the biggest mindset of a person who was going into the military to combat. To want to be in that scenario of life and death.
You want to. And experience.
This is different, I guess. Yeah. This is different. But to how close is that to that? Do people really want to experience the real deal? Or do they say, you know what? No, we just like to...
Well, it's like a dichotomy between, like, I want to experience it, and then also been like, well, I don't really want to experience it.
Right here. Right here.
Yeah. Like, there's just, like, do you really? Because, like I say, like, there's different gradations within the context of doing armored combat or reenactment combat. I would say what I do with the side of creating an anachronism is sort of in the middle. It's violent, but as a friend of mine said, it's the right amount of violence.
Right.
Can you get hurt? Yes. Can you break a bone? Yes. Is it common? No. Can you get a concussion? Yes. Is it common? No. All right. Whereas there's styles where they use softer weapons, You'll see this in sort of movies or people make fun of it, it's more fantasy oriented and they're which you don't have to wear any armor because it's foam, right? And so they can move those weapons really fast and no one wears armor. So it's really not getting hurt. You get slapped, maybe scratched. And then there's a style that's way harder, which my words, I call it the Slavic style because a lot of it came out of Poland, Russia, and Ukraine in the early 2000s when as everything opened up, as the Soviet Union came apart, there was reenactment groups just burbling under the surface in the early 90s in the Soviet Union, right? Because I met some of them when I was there. And then it just took off, but they have a much harder version of fighting